The first thing my husband said after our son was born was not congratulations. It was not I love you, it was not even are you okay. Instead, he stood beside my hospital bed staring at our newborn like he was looking at a bill he refused to pay. Then he quietly told me that everything between us had been a mistake, and that he had already promised another woman the life that should have been mine. In that single moment, while I was still holding my baby for the first time, my marriage ended without a single tear falling from my eyes. My name is Hannah Brooks, and I was 31 years old when I learned that a person can spend years loving someone without ever truly knowing them. People often ask when I realized my husband was living a double life. The truth is, it was not one big clue that exposed him. It was dozens of tiny moments I convinced myself did not matter until they finally came together like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. I met Ethan Brooks while working as a financial analyst for an investment company in Nashville. He owned a successful construction business that had grown rapidly over the previous decade. Unlike many wealthy businessmen, he seemed humble and approachable. He remembered the names of waiters, carried groceries for elderly neighbors, and always made time for his family. Everyone around us admired him. Even my parents believed I had found the perfect husband. Looking back, I realize he did not fool only me. He fooled everyone. The first 2 years of our marriage were filled with plans for the future. We bought a beautiful home with a large front porch, planted fruit trees in the backyard, and spent weekends talking about the children we hoped to have someday. When pregnancy did not happen right away, Ethan never complained. He attended every medical appointment, comforted me after disappointing test results, and constantly reminded me that we still had each other. Those memories became the hardest ones to let go because they felt so real. When I finally became pregnant after nearly 3 years of waiting, Ethan seemed happier than anyone. He painted the nursery himself, assembled every piece of furniture, and even read parenting books late into the night. He insisted on attending every ultrasound appointment and proudly showed our baby's pictures to anyone willing to look. If someone had told me then that he was hiding another family only 30 minutes away, I would have laughed at the idea. I trusted him completely because trust had become the foundation of my entire life. There were warning signs, but they always arrived wrapped in believable excuses. Business trips became more frequent, evening meetings lasted longer than expected. Sometimes he answered phone calls outside instead of in the living room, saying he did not want to wake me while I rested during pregnancy. Whenever I questioned him, he smiled, kissed my forehead, and apologized for working so hard. I wanted to believe him because the alternative was too painful to imagine. The day I went into labor began like any other morning. Ethan rushed me to the hospital while trying to stay calm, even though I could see fear in his eyes. He held my hand through every contraction, encouraged me whenever I felt too exhausted to continue, and celebrated the moment our little boy finally entered the world. Watching him smile through tears made me believe every difficult year had been worth it. I thought our family had finally begun. About 2 hours later, after the nurses had finished their examinations and the room became quiet, everything changed. Ethan stepped into the hallway to answer a phone call. His voice sounded tense, almost desperate. I could not hear every word, but I heard enough to know someone was demanding answers he could no longer avoid giving. When he returned, he had changed into a fresh suit even though he had nowhere important to be. His face looked strangely calm, almost rehearsed, as though he had practiced the conversation 100 times in his mind before walking back through that hospital door. He stood beside the window for several seconds before finally looking at me. Then he admitted he had been seeing another woman for almost 2 years. My heart stopped, but he was not finished. He explained that she had recently given birth to a little girl, and that his parents had accepted her as part of the family because they believed she came from a more influential background than I did. He quietly told me that if he publicly acknowledged our son, it would complicate business deals his father had already arranged. Then he asked me to agree to a private divorce and allow him to disappear from our lives without creating a scandal. For several seconds I could not hear anything except my baby's gentle breathing. Every promise Ethan had ever made replayed inside my mind before collapsing all at once. I expected myself to scream, cry, or beg him to explain how any of this could possibly be real. Instead, I looked down at my son sleeping peacefully against my chest and realized he deserved a mother who remained strong even when her own heart was breaking. I lifted my eyes toward Ethan and smiled so calmly that it caught him completely off guard. I thanked him for finally telling me the truth because now I knew exactly who he was. Then I quietly explained that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. He laughed softly and said I would eventually understand that protecting the family business mattered more than emotions. He kissed the top of his own hand instead of his son's forehead, turned toward the door, and walked away without looking back. The moment the door closed behind him, I reached for my phone and made exactly one call, not to my parents, not to a lawyer. I called the only person who had ever warned me that Ethan cared more about appearances than people, his grandfather, Arthur Brooks. I had not spoken to him in nearly a year after he retired from the company, but I remembered something he once told me during Thanksgiving dinner. If you ever find yourself standing alone because of choices someone in this family makes, call me before you call anyone else. I never forgot those words, and as the phone rang, I had no idea that the conversation about to begin would change far more than my marriage. It would determine the future of an entire family empire. Arthur answered before the second ring. His voice sounded older than I remembered, but there was still a quiet confidence behind every word. The moment he heard me crying, he stopped asking questions and simply listened. I told him everything from beginning to end, including the affair, the other child, and the cruel way Ethan had walked away from his own son only hours after he was born. There was a long silence before Arthur finally spoke. He did not sound surprised. Instead, he sounded disappointed in someone he had been trying to save from himself for years. He asked me one question that caught me completely off guard. Did Ethan sign the partnership agreement I gave both of you after your wedding? I remembered the afternoon clearly. Shortly after our marriage, Arthur had insisted we meet him at his office. He explained that every future member of the Brooks family should understand the responsibility that came with owning part of the company. At the time, I barely glanced at the paperwork because I trusted everyone involved. Arthur quietly told me that the agreement protected honest people from dishonest decisions. I never imagined those papers would someday protect me. The next morning, Arthur arrived at the hospital carrying coffee for me and a small blue teddy bear for my son. He gently held his great-grandson for several minutes before placing a thick envelope on the bedside table. Inside were copies of company documents, trust agreements, and ownership records. Only then did I discover something Ethan had either forgotten or hoped I would never learn. When Arthur retired, he had transferred a significant portion of his voting shares into a family trust. Under the trust rules, any spouse abandoned because of proven marital misconduct had the legal right to request an emergency review of executive leadership if that misconduct threatened the company's public reputation. Ethan had never bothered reading the agreement because he assumed he would never need to. Arthur looked directly at me and said something I have never forgotten. Revenge fades quickly, but accountability lasts much longer. If you choose to move forward, do it because your son deserves honesty, not because you want to hurt his father. Those words settled something inside me. Until then, I had been thinking only about surviving. Now I realized I also had the opportunity to protect my child's future. 3 days later, I left the hospital with my baby in my arms and my wedding ring in my purse instead of on my finger. My older brother, Caleb, helped me move into a small furnished cottage he owned outside the city. It was nothing like the luxury home Ethan and I had shared, but every room felt peaceful. For the first time in months, I slept without waiting for a late-night phone call or another excuse about an unexpected business trip. Meanwhile, Ethan assumed I would quietly accept the divorce he wanted. He even sent legal papers asking me to sign a confidentiality agreement promising I would never discuss our marriage publicly. In exchange, he offered a generous financial settlement. Reading those documents made me smile, because they revealed exactly how worried he had become. If he truly believed he had done nothing wrong, there would have been no reason to buy my silence. Working alongside Arthur's attorney, I formally requested the executive review allowed under the family trust. The company board scheduled a special meeting within 2 weeks. Several investors had already heard rumors about Ethan living a double life, and they wanted answers before approving a major expansion project worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Suddenly the secret Ethan had worked so hard to hide became impossible to ignore. The board meeting took place in the company's headquarters on a rainy Thursday morning. I walked into the conference room carrying my son instead of a briefcase. Every executive around the table watched as Arthur welcomed me with quiet respect before taking his own seat. Ethan looked completely stunned. He clearly believed I would stay home feeling sorry for myself instead of standing confidently in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to him. The chairman calmly reviewed evidence showing that Ethan had used company resources to hide personal expenses connected to his affair, while repeatedly signing financial disclosures claiming there were no personal matters that could affect executive leadership. Several board members looked visibly uncomfortable as more information surfaced. Then something unexpected happened. The woman Ethan had chosen over me entered the room. She had not come to defend him, she had come to tell the truth. With tears in her eyes, she admitted Ethan had promised to leave his marriage long before she became pregnant. She confessed that he had been telling both of us completely different stories, convincing each woman that the other relationship was nearly over. She apologized directly to me, and said she had discovered only days earlier that he had never intended to build an honest future with either of us. In that moment I realized we had never been enemies, we had simply been victims of the same lies. Ethan tried to interrupt several times, insisting everything was a misunderstanding, but every explanation contradicted the last one. Finally Arthur stood and quietly addressed the room. He explained that wealth could always be rebuilt, but character rarely could. Then he announced that he was using his voting authority to recommend Ethan's immediate removal as company president until an independent investigation was completed. One by one, the remaining board members cast their votes. The decision was unanimous. When the meeting ended, Ethan followed me into the hallway. Gone was the confident businessman everyone admired. Standing before me was a frightened man who had finally run out of excuses. He apologized repeatedly, promising he would change if I gave him another chance. He even reached toward the baby carrier, hoping to hold the son he had abandoned only weeks earlier. I gently stepped back. I reminded him that being a father begins with showing up when your child first needs you, not when your reputation begins falling apart. Then I wished him well because anger was no longer something I wanted to carry into my son's future. Over the following year, the divorce was finalized without unnecessary fighting. I accepted only what was legally fair and focused on rebuilding my own life instead of destroying someone else's. Arthur remained an active part of his great-grandson's life, visiting often and teaching me lessons about strength, patience, and integrity. Even the other woman eventually moved away with her daughter, determined to create a healthier future instead of remaining trapped by Ethan's broken promises. Today my son is 3 years old. He loves dinosaurs, insists on wearing mismatched socks almost every morning, and believes every dog he sees is secretly waiting to become his best friend. Sometimes he asks why Grandpa Arthur visits more often than his father. I simply tell him that real family is made up of the people who choose to love you every single day. Looking back, I no longer remember the hospital room as the place where my marriage ended. I remember it as the place where I finally stopped depending on someone else to decide my worth. Ethan believed walking away from his newborn son would protect everything he cared about. Instead, he lost the family that loved him, the career he spent years building, and the respect he valued above all else. As for me, I gained something far more valuable than any fortune his company could ever provide. I gained the freedom to raise my son in a home where love is never conditional, honesty is never optional, and no child will ever have to wonder whether they were chosen. In the end, that became the greatest inheritance either of us could ever receive.